The morning started like any other at Buckingham Palace. Guards changed shifts. Staff moved silently through corridors. The king had meetings scheduled back to back. Nobody expected that by noon, the entire palace would be in chaos. Before we continue with this shocking story, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. It was a Tuesday in late October. Rain tapped against the tall windows. King Charles sat in his private study, reviewing documents that needed his signature. He had been working since 7 that morning. The autumn light was gray and cold. Guard Thomas Reynolds stood outside the study door. He had been assigned to the king for 3 years. Thomas knew Charles's routines better than most. He knew when the king was tired, when he was frustrated, when something was wrong. That morning, something felt off. Charles had been unusually quiet. He barely spoke during the morning briefing. His private secretary had noticed it too. The king touched his chest twice. Brief moments, like he was checking something. Testing a pain that wouldn't go away, Thomas watched through the partially open door. Charles sat behind his desk, one hand pressed against his sternum. His breathing looked shallow, fast. His face had gone pale. "Your Majesty, are you quite all right?" Thomas asked, stepping inside. Charles looked up, tried to smile. "Just tired, Thomas. Nothing a bit of tea won't fix." But his hand stayed on his chest. Thomas didn't move. Something in his training, his instincts, told him not to leave. He stayed near the door, watching carefully. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Charles kept working, but his movements had slowed. He set down his pen, reached for water with a hand that trembled slightly. Then it happened. Charles stood from his desk too quickly. His face twisted in pain. He grabbed the edge of the desk, knuckles white. His breathing came in sharp gasps. "Sir." Thomas rushed forward. Charles tried to speak, but couldn't form words. His left arm clutched his chest. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His eyes went wide with fear and confusion. Thomas hit the emergency button on his radio. "Medical emergency in the king's study. I repeat, medical emergency. Now." Charles's knees buckled. Thomas caught him, lowering him carefully to the floor. The king's face had turned gray. His lips were losing color. "Stay with me, sir," Thomas said, his voice calm despite the panic rising in his chest. "Help is coming. Just breathe." Charles's eyes locked onto Thomas's face. There was terror there. Raw human terror. This was a man who had lived a life of privilege and power. Right now, he was just scared, vulnerable, mortal. Footsteps thundered down the corridor. The palace physician burst through the door, medical bag in hand. 2 more guards arrived. Then nurses with emergency equipment. "Heart attack," the physician said immediately, checking Charles's pulse. "We need to stabilize him here before we move him." The room became a flurry of controlled chaos. An oxygen mask. 4 lines. Monitors beeping urgent warnings. Thomas stepped back, but stayed close, watching everything. Charles's eyes fluttered. His consciousness was fading in and out. The medical team worked with precise urgency. Every second mattered. "We need to get him to the hospital," the physician said. Now, as they prepared to move the king, Thomas heard rapid footsteps in the corridor. He turned. Queen Camilla appeared in the doorway. Her face was flushed. She must have run from wherever she was in the palace. For a moment, she stood frozen, staring at her husband on the floor, surrounded by medical personnel. Then, Thomas saw something that made his blood run cold. Camilla's expression wasn't shock. It wasn't fear. It was something else entirely, something that would haunt Thomas for weeks to come. Her eyes narrowed. Her jaw tightened. And for just a fraction of a second before she composed herself, Thomas saw what looked like anger. Not worry. Not panic. Anger? What happened? Camilla demanded, her voice sharp and controlled. "Heart attack, ma'am," the physician replied without looking up. "We're transporting him immediately." Camilla stepped forward, but not close. She stayed near the door, arms crossed. She didn't kneel beside her husband. didn't reach for his hand, didn't speak words of comfort. She just watched, cold, calculating. Charles's eyes opened briefly. He looked toward Camilla. His hand lifted weakly, reaching for her. She didn't move. Thomas felt something crack inside his chest. This was wrong. Everything about her reaction was wrong. The medical team lifted Charles onto a stretcher. They moved quickly toward the door. Camilla stepped aside, letting them pass. "I'll follow in the car," she said flatly. "Not I'm coming with you. Not please hurry." Just a statement of logistics as the stretcher disappeared down the corridor. Thomas stood in the empty study. Rain still fell outside. Papers were scattered across the desk where Charles had been working minutes before, and Thomas couldn't shake what he had seen in Camilla's eyes. Something was very, very wrong. The hospital was 40 minutes away. Charles was taken to a private wing where royals received care away from public eyes. The medical team worked around the clock. Tests, scans, medications. Pumped through 4 lines. Thomas wasn't assigned to hospital duty, but he couldn't leave. Something kept him there. A feeling he couldn't shake. So he stayed in the corridor outside the private wing, technically off duty but unable to walk away. William and Catherine arrived within an hour. Catherine's face was pale with worry. William's jaw was set tight, his eyes red. They rushed past Thomas without seeing him, disappearing into their father's room. Harry flew in from California. Anne came from her estate in Scotland. The family gathered, as families do when death feels close. But Camilla's behavior remained strange. She arrived at the hospital 90 minutes after Charles. She had changed clothes, fixed her makeup. Her hair was perfect. She looked more like she was attending a formal dinner than visiting her husband who had nearly died. Thomas watched from his position down the hall as she entered the private wing. No tears, no trembling hands, just cold composure. A nurse he knew, Sarah, came out of the wing looking shaken. Thomas caught her eye. "How is he?" Thomas asked quietly. Sarah glanced around, then stepped closer. Stable, but it was close. Another 10 minutes, and she didn't finish. Didn't need to. And the Queen. Sarah's expression changed. Became guarded. "I shouldn't say please." Sarah hesitated, then spoke in barely a whisper. She asked about his will. Before asking how he was doing, she wanted to know if any documents needed updating. Thomas felt ice slide down his spine. Who asks about a will when their husband is fighting for his life? Sarah's eyes were wide with disbelief. The doctor was shocked. Prince William heard it. His face... I've never seen someone look so angry and hurt at the same time. Sarah left quickly, not wanting to be caught gossiping. But the damage was done. The truth was out. Thomas's mind raced. He had seen Camilla's reaction in the study. The anger in her eyes. Something dark was unfolding, and he was one of the few who had witnessed it from the beginning. Inside Charles's room, the king drifted in and out of consciousness. When he was awake, his children surrounded him. Catherine held his hand. William spoke to him softly. Anne stood at the foot of the bed, her face carved from stone, holding back emotion. Camilla sat in a chair by the window, separate from the family, on her phone more than once. Her face showed irritation, not grief. At one point, Charles woke fully. His eyes found William. "Son," he whispered, his voice weak. William leaned close. "I'm here, Dad. We're all here." Charles's eyes moved around the room, taking in his children. Then they landed on Camilla. Something flickered across his face. Hurt. Understanding. Like a veil had been lifted. "William," Charles said, gripping his son's hand with surprising strength. "We need to talk. Alone." William nodded. He asked everyone to leave for a moment. Catherine kissed Charles's forehead before going. Anne squeezed his foot gently. Harry touched his shoulder. Camilla stood, but didn't approach the bed. "I'll be outside," she said, her tone clipped. When the room was empty except for father and son, Charles spoke. His words were halting, broken by shallow breaths, but clear. "I heard her," he said. "When I was on the floor, I heard what she said to her assistant on the phone. She thought I was unconscious. William's face went pale. What did she say? Charles closed his eyes. Pain crossed his features, and not from his heart. She said this might actually solve our problems. That's what she called my heart attack. A solution. The words hung in the air like poison. William's hands curled into fists. Dad, she asked about the will, didn't she? The nurse told me. Charles opened his eyes. They were filled with a sadness deeper than physical pain. 20 years. And this is who she is when I'm dying. You're not dying, William said firmly, but his voice cracked. Maybe not today. But William, you need to understand something. Charles took a shaky breath. I've made excuses for her for years. Defended her when others criticized. Believed she loved me despite everything. But this. He shook his head slowly. You can't fake care when someone is dying. That's when the truth shows. William sat down heavily. His father, the king, the man who had always seemed untouchable, looked broken. Not from the heart attack, but from the betrayal that cut deeper than any medical emergency. What do you want me to do? William asked. Watch her closely and protect your family. Protect Catherine and the children. Because if she could be this cold to me, I don't trust what she might do to secure her position when I'm gone. Outside in the corridor, Thomas saw Camilla on her phone again. Her voice carried slightly, just loud enough. No, we can't discuss that now, she was saying. But yes, things may be changing sooner than expected. Just be ready. Thomas's blood ran cold. He moved closer, pretending to check something on his own phone, Camilla continued, not noticing him. The documents are in place. If anything happens, we move immediately. Understood? She ended the call and looked up. Her eyes met Thomas's. For a moment, neither moved. Then Camilla smiled, cold, calculated. Guard, she said, her voice pleasant but with an edge underneath. You seem to be everywhere lately? Just doing my job, ma'am. Of course. Us. She stepped closer. I wonder, though, what exactly have you seen? What have you heard? Thomas kept his face neutral. I'm not sure what you mean, Your Majesty. Camilla's smile didn't reach her eyes. I think you know exactly what I mean. Walls have ears. Guards have eyes. But loyalty, Thomas, that's what matters in this family. Remember where your loyalty should lie. It wasn't a question. It was a threat. Thomas didn't sleep that night. He kept replaying everything in his mind. Camilla's initial reaction? Her question about the will. The phone conversation. The thinly veiled threat. He knew what he had witnessed was important. Dangerous. But who could he tell? Going to the media was unthinkable. Betraying royal confidence went against everything he stood for. But staying silent felt like being complicit in something dark. The next morning, Charles was moved to a recovery room. His condition had stabilized, but doctors said he needed weeks of rest. No stress, no work. Complete bed rest followed by months of careful recovery. William took control of the situation immediately. He wasn't king yet, but he moved with the authority of someone who knew crisis management. He spoke with doctors, coordinated family visits, and kept the press at bay with carefully worded statements. Catherine stayed close, a steady presence that calmed everyone around her. She brought the children for brief visits that made Charles smile for the first time since the collapse. Those moments of genuine love stood in stark contrast to Camilla's cold distance. Camilla played her part publicly. She released a statement expressing concern and gratitude for the medical team. She posed for one carefully staged photo at Charles's bedside, her hand on his arm. Her face arranged in an expression of worry, but Thomas saw what happened after the cameras left. The moment the photographer was gone, Camilla pulled her hand back as if she'd touched something unpleasant. She checked her phone. She asked the nurse when Charles would be mobile enough for important discussions. Anne noticed, too. Charles's sister had always been sharp, observant, protective of her brother. She watched Camilla with narrowed eyes, her disapproval barely concealed. On the third day, Anne found Thomas in the hospital corridor. Guard Reynolds, she said. Her tone formal, but her eyes searching his face. "I'd like a word." They stepped into an empty consultation room. Anne closed the door and turned to face him directly. "You were there when my brother collapsed," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." "And you've been here since, even off duty?" Anne crossed her arms. "Why?" Thomas chose his words carefully. "I wanted to ensure His Majesty was safe." Safe from what? Heart disease. Or something else? The question hung between them. Thomas knew this was a moment that would define everything going forward. He could stay silent, play it safe, protect himself. Or he could tell the truth to someone who might actually be able to do something about it. He took a breath and decided, "I saw Queen Camilla's reaction when the king collapsed. It wasn't what you'd expect from a wife watching her husband nearly die." Anne's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition. Confirmation of something she had already suspected. "Go on." Thomas told her everything. The anger in Camilla's eyes. The question about the will. The phone conversation about documents and moving quickly. The threat about loyalty. Anne listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You're putting yourself at risk telling me this," she finally said. "I know. Camilla has powerful friends. People who owe her favors. She could make your life very difficult."
"I understand that."
"But I took an oath to protect the royal family. All of them. Including from threats inside the palace walls." Anne studied him, then nodded once. Sharp and decisive. "You're braver than most. Stay close to my brother. Watch everything. And report to me directly if you see or hear anything else unusual." "Yes, ma'am." "And Thomas?" Anne's voice softened slightly. "Be careful. You're not wrong about Camilla. She's dangerous when cornered." After Anne left, Thomas felt the weight of his decision. He had just made himself a target, but he had also found an ally in the king's sister. Someone who could actually do something with the information he provided inside Charles's room. The king was having a conversation with William that would change everything. "I want you to take over more duties," Charles said, his voice still weak but determined. "Officially. Public announcement." William frowned. "Dad, you're going to recover. You'll be back to work in a few months." "Maybe. But this heart attack was a warning, and it showed me something I needed to see." Charles paused, gathering strength. "I need you ready, William. Ready for when I'm gone? And I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't let her have power." Charles's eyes were intense. "When I'm gone, Camilla will try to maintain influence. She'll use her title, her connections, her position. Don't let her. She doesn't care about this family or this country. She cares about herself." William swallowed hard. Hearing his father speak so bitterly about the woman he had married was painful. Catherine was right about her all along, wasn't she? Charles continued. "I should have listened. Should have seen it years ago. But I was blind, foolish. In love with someone who was never capable of loving me back. Dad, promise me, William. Promise me you'll protect this family from her. That you'll limit her role when the time comes. That you won't let sentiment or tradition or obligation cloud your judgment." William took his father's hand. "I promise." Outside the hospital, the press had gathered. They knew something was happening beyond the official statements. Rumors were spreading. Staff members talked. Whispers reached journalists' ears. A reporter from a major newspaper had started asking questions. Questions about the Queen Consort's behavior at the hospital, about tension within the royal family, about documents and wills and succession plans. Camilla's people moved quickly to shut it down. Threats of legal action. Access denied. Sources warned to stay quiet. But the reporter was persistent, and Thomas knew it was only a matter of time before the story broke wide open. On the 5th day, Charles was finally allowed visitors beyond immediate family. Friends came, advisors, religious leaders offering prayers and comfort. One visitor surprised. Everyone guard James Mitchell. The man who had protected Catherine during her confrontation with Camilla months earlier requested permission to see the king. It was unusual, but Charles agreed immediately. Thomas stood outside during that meeting, but he heard pieces through the partially open door. "Your Majesty, I wanted you to know something," James was saying. "I've served this family for 16 years. I've seen a lot, and I need you to know that not everyone is who they pretend to be. I'm learning that lesson rather painfully, James. There are people who will protect you and your family, sir. People who see the truth. We may be just guards, just staff, but we're loyal to what's right. Not to power, not to position, to what's right." There was a pause. Then Charles spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. That means more than you know." When James left the room, his eyes met Thomas's. A silent understanding passed between them. They were both in this now. Both committed to protecting the family from a threat that wore a crown and smiled for cameras. That night, Camilla made a mistake. She thought Charles was asleep. The room was dark, except for the glow of medical monitors. She stood by his bed, looking down at him. Thomas watched through the small window in the door. Hidden by the angle, Camilla pulled out her phone, typed a message. Then she whispered to herself, barely audible, "Stubborn old fool. Would have been easier if you'd just died." Thomas's blood turned to ice. Charles's eyes were closed, but his heart monitor showed a spike. He had heard, he was awake, and now he knew the full truth. The next morning, everything changed. Charles requested a meeting with his private secretary, his lawyer, and William. Camilla was not invited. When she tried to enter the room, she was politely but firmly told the meeting was confidential. Her face turned red with anger. "I'm his wife. I have a right to be present." "Not for this, ma'am," the secretary replied, his tone respectful but immovable. Camilla stared at the closed door for a long moment, then walked away. Her heels clicked sharply against the hospital floor, each step radiating fury. Thomas watched from his post. He saw the exact moment Camilla realized she was losing control. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. She made 3 calls in rapid succession, her voice low and urgent inside the room. Charles was rewriting his future. "I want her removed from any position of power after my death," Charles told his lawyer. "No role in the Regency Council. No influence over decisions. Her title remains for appearance's sake, but nothing more." William sat beside his father, his expression grave. "Dad, this is a massive decision. The public will ask questions. Let them ask." Charles's voice was stronger than it had been in days. "I almost died, William, and my wife's first thought was about inheritance. Her second thought was relief that I might be gone. I heard what she said last night. I know exactly who she is now." The lawyer made notes, his face carefully neutral. "Your Majesty, these changes will need to be documented thoroughly. There may be legal challenges, and prepare for them. I want this airtight. I want it impossible for her to contest or manipulate." Charles leaned forward, ignoring the pain in his chest. "And I want it done before I leave this hospital." By afternoon, the documents were drawn up. Charles signed them with steady hands, witnessed by William and 2 senior advisors. The new arrangements were sealed, copied, and stored in multiple secure locations. Camilla had been cut out. News of the meeting spread through the hospital. Staff like wildfire. Nobody knew the details, but they knew something significant had happened. The king's face looked lighter, despite his physical weakness. Like a burden had been lifted, Camilla knew something had changed too. She felt it in the way staff members looked at her, in the careful distance William maintained, in the way Anne smiled coldly whenever they passed each other. That evening, Camilla confronted Charles. Thomas was stationed outside the room, but the voices carried. He heard everything. "What did you do?" Camilla demanded. "What did you sign?" "I made arrangements for my family's future," Charles replied calmly. "That's all you need to know. I'm your wife. I have rights. You have what I choose to give you. Nothing more." There was a long silence. When Camilla spoke again, her voice had changed. Gone was the pretense of concern, the facade of the devoted wife. What remained was raw anger. "You stupid old man. Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed for you? The years I've spent playing this role? Smiling for cameras? Pretending to care about your ridiculous causes? I'm beginning to understand exactly what you've sacrificed, Charles said quietly. Nothing. You've sacrificed nothing but your authenticity. And now everyone sees it. Everyone. Or just your precious William and his perfect little wife. They've turned you against me. Fed you lies. No one fed me anything, Camilla. I heard you. Last night, standing over my bed, wishing I had died. Those were your words, not theirs. The silence that followed was deafening. You were awake, Camilla finally whispered. I was awake. Thomas heard something fall. Perhaps Camilla grabbing the edge of a table for support. When she spoke again, her voice was different, dangerous. You'll regret this. I've given you everything. My reputation, my time, my life, and you're going to throw me aside like garbage? You gave me nothing, Camilla. You took, that's all you've ever done. And now I'm taking back what's mine. My dignity, my family. My legacy. Camilla's exit was violent. The door slammed open so hard it hit the wall. Thomas stepped back, but Camilla didn't even see him. Her face was twisted with rage and something else. Fear. She stormed down the corridor, her composure completely shattered. Staff members pressed themselves against walls to avoid her path. Thomas immediately entered Charles's room to check on him. The king looked exhausted but resolute. Sir, are you all right? Charles nodded slowly. I am now. For the first time in years, I actually am. His heart monitor showed elevated readings, but nothing dangerous. The confrontation had taken energy he didn't have to spare, but it had been necessary. William arrived 20 minutes later. Having been summoned by Anne, Catherine came with him, her face concerned. She knows, Charles told them, about the changes. She's furious, Good Anne said from the doorway, having appeared silently. Let her rage. She has no power anymore. But Catherine looked worried. People who feel cornered can be unpredictable, dangerous. She was right. That night, Camilla held a meeting with her closest allies. Thomas learned about it through Sarah, the nurse who had become a quiet informant. She's calling in favors, Sarah whispered. Talking about public statements, about going to the press with her side of the story. She's planning something big. Thomas reported this immediately to Anne, who in turn informed William. They'd anticipated this. Camilla wouldn't go quietly. She had spent years building her image, cultivating relationships, positioning herself. She wouldn't let it all crumble without a fight. William called an emergency meeting with the king's communications team. They needed to control the narrative before Camilla could twist it. If she goes public with lies, we respond with truth, William said firmly. No more protecting her reputation at the expense of our family. Catherine touched his arm gently. We need to be careful. The public still sees her as the queen consort. They don't know what we know. Then maybe it's time they learned, Anne said coldly. But Charles shook his head from his hospital bed, where he listened via video call. No, we don't air private matters publicly. That's not who we are. We handle this with dignity, even if she doesn't, William challenged. Especially if she doesn't. That's what separates us from her. The next morning brought the bombshell they had feared, a tabloid. Published an exclusive interview with an unnamed palace source, clearly Camilla or someone speaking for her. The article painted Charles as an ungrateful, manipulated husband. It claimed William and Catherine were scheming to push Camilla out. It suggested the king's illness had been exaggerated to garner sympathy. The lies were bold, calculated, and devastating. The palace switchboard lit up. Social media exploded. The press camped outside the hospital in even larger numbers, and in his hospital room, Charles read the article with sad, tired eyes. So it begins, he said quietly. But what Camilla didn't know was that Thomas had been documenting everything. Every overheard conversation, every witnessed moment, every piece of evidence that revealed her, his true character. And he wasn't the only one. Staff members throughout the palace had seen enough. The housekeepers who heard her shouting at servants, the drivers who listened to her cruel phone conversations, the secretaries who read her dismissive emails, One by one, they came forward. Not to the press, but to Anne, to William, to the king's most trusted advisors. They brought evidence, recordings, messages, testimonies. Camilla had made enemies without realizing it. She had treated people as invisible, forgetting that invisible people see everything, and now those people were ready to speak. The truth was coming out, and it was going to destroy her. The palace's legal team moved with surgical precision. They didn't respond to Camilla's tabloid interview publicly. Instead, they quietly gathered evidence, prepared statements, and built a case that would protect the king and his family. Thomas became a key witness. His testimony about Camilla's reaction during Charles's collapse was documented in detailed reports. The security footage from the study was secured and copied to multiple locations. His account of the phone conversations and the whispered comment over Charles's bed were recorded by palace lawyers. But Thomas wasn't alone. Sarah, the nurse, provided medical records showing Camilla's behavior at the hospital. How she asked about legal documents before asking about her husband's condition. How she spent more time on her phone than at Charles's bedside. How other staff members had to remind her to show appropriate concern when visitors arrived. The king's private secretary came forward with emails, messages from Camilla discussing financial arrangements, property transfers, and succession planning, all dated within hours of Charles's collapse. She had been planning for his death before he was even stable. A housekeeper provided recordings of Camilla's phone calls. In one particularly damning conversation, Camilla discussed how Charles's death would finally give her the freedom she deserved and how she planned to maintain influence through strategic relationships. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, devastating. William reviewed everything with his father. Charles sat propped up in his hospital bed reading document after document. His face showed pain that had nothing to do with his heart. "I loved her," Charles said quietly. "Or I thought I did. How could I have been so blind?" "She was good at pretending," William replied. "She fooled a lot of people for a long time. But not Catherine. Catherine saw through her from the beginning." Charles looked at his son. "Your wife has good instincts. Listen to them." Catherine, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, spoke up. "I never wanted to be right about this. I wish I had been wrong." The question now was what to do with all the evidence. Charles's instinct was still to handle things privately, to remove Camilla from power quietly without public scandal. But Anne had different ideas. She went public with lies and argued during a family meeting. "She tried to destroy your reputation while you were recovering from a heart attack. She deserves to face consequences." "Public consequences will hurt the monarchy," Charles countered. "The institution is bigger than any one person, including her. But staying silent makes us look weak," William said. "Makes it look like her lies have merit." They were at an impasse, until Catherine suggested something that surprised everyone. "What if we let her destroy herself?" Catherine said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her.
What do you mean?"
William asked. "We don't release the evidence. We don't make accusations. We simply correct the record factually and let her keep talking. Eventually, she'd contradict herself. She'll say something that can be proven false, and then the truth will come out naturally." Anne considered this. "It's risky. Gives her time to do more damage. But it also gives us the moral high ground," Catherine continued. "We're not attacking her. We're just being truthful. When the evidence does come out, through whatever channel, it will be more powerful because we didn't weaponize it." Charles smiled weakly. "You're wiser than all of us." They decided to follow Catherine's strategy. The palace released a brief statement correcting factual errors in the tabloid article. It mentioned nothing about Camilla's behavior or the evidence they had gathered. It simply stated facts about Charles's medical condition, his recovery timeline, and his gratitude for public support. The statement was calm, dignified, and notably didn't defend Camilla or validate her role as a concerned wife. The press noticed the omission immediately. Camilla, meanwhile, grew more desperate. She gave another interview, this time on camera. Her performance was calculated, tears at the right moments. trembling voice when discussing her worry for Charles. Expressions of hurt over being excluded from her husband's care. But people were starting to see through it. Social media users analyzed her body language, noted the lack of genuine emotion, compared her public tears to her composed, nearly smiling appearance in photos from the same day. Then a former palace staff member, someone Camilla had fired years ago, came forward with their own story. They described years of verbal abuse, impossible demands, and cruel treatment. They had emails and messages to back up their claims. Other former employees followed. One by one, they told stories of Camilla's true character behind palace walls. The pattern was clear and consistent. Camilla's public image began to crack. A major newspaper, the one whose reporter had been asking questions from the beginning, published a careful but damning investigation. They had spoken to dozens of sources, cross-referenced stories, verified claims. The article didn't make accusations. It simply presented facts, timeline of events, documented behavior, pattern of concerning actions. The public response was immediate and harsh. Social media turned against Camilla. Hashtags calling for her removal from royal duties trended worldwide. Think pieces analyzed her history, her actions. Her character Charles watched it unfold from his hospital room with mixed emotions. He felt vindicated but also sad. This was a woman he had married, had defended for years, had believed loved him. "I'm sorry you're seeing this, Dad," William said. "Don't be. I needed to see who she really was. I just wish it hadn't taken nearly dying to open my eyes." Camilla tried to fight back. She released statements through her lawyers, claimed she was being victimized, suggested there was a conspiracy to remove her. But with each statement, she sounded more desperate, more unhinged, more like someone guilty trying to deflect rather than someone innocent defending themselves. The final blow came from an unexpected source, one of Camilla's closest friends. Someone she had confided in for years came forward. They provided text messages where Camilla openly discussed her true feelings about Charles, about the royal family, about her role as queen consort. In those messages, Camilla called Charles a means to an end. She discussed how to maintain her position and influence after his death. She mocked his health problems and joked about how his age made him easier to manage. The messages were verified as authentic, published in a respected newspaper, spread across every news outlet in the country. The evidence Catherine had suggested they let emerge naturally had finally come out. And because the palace hadn't released it, hadn't weaponized it, the impact was even stronger. Camilla had destroyed herself. Public opinion turned completely. Calls for her to step down as queen consort grew louder. Members of parliament spoke out. Religious leaders expressed concern. Even some of Camilla's former allies quietly distanced themselves in his hospital room. Charles received a visit from his most senior advisors. They presented him with options for how to proceed. "Your Majesty, the situation is untenable," his chief advisor said. "Queen Camilla's position has become a liability to the crown." Oh. Charles nodded slowly. "I know. What are my options?" They discussed various scenarios: separation, divorce, a quiet arrangement where Camilla retained her title but had no public role. Each option had consequences, but doing nothing was no longer possible. "I want to speak with her," Charles finally said. "One more time. She deserves that much." William looked doubtful. "Dad, are you sure? She's proven she can't be trusted. I need to hear what she has to say. Need to give her the chance to explain herself face to face. Then I'll make my decision." The meeting was arranged for the following day. Camilla arrived at the hospital with her lawyer. Her face was harder than Thomas had ever seen it. Whatever vulnerability she had shown publicly was gone. Replaced by cold calculation, Thomas stood guard outside the room. But he could hear raised voices, accusations, denials, the sound of furniture moving as someone stood abruptly, then silence. When Camilla emerged 30 minutes later, her face was pale. Her lawyer looked grim. Neither spoke as they left the hospital. Thomas entered to check on Charles. The king sat slumped in his chair, looking older than his years. "It's over," Charles said simply. She's leaving. Separation to be announced within the week. Divorce to follow once the legal arrangements are complete. Are you all right, sir? Charles looked up at Thomas with tired eyes. I will be. Eventually. Right now, I just feel relieved. And grateful? Grateful, sir? That I survived. That I got a second chance to see clearly. That I have people around me who truly care. Charles smiled weakly, including guards who watch over me, even when off duty. Thomas felt emotion rise in his throat, but kept his composure. Just doing what's right, sir. It's more than most people do, Thomas. Remember that. The announcement came 3 days later. A brief, formal statement from Buckingham Palace. The king and queen consort had agreed to separate. Details of living arrangements and official duties would be determined in due course. The statement asked for privacy during this difficult time. The public reaction was surprisingly supportive. Most people had seen the evidence, read the articles, understood what had happened. They felt sympathy for Charles, not Camilla. Camilla moved out of Clarence's house within a week. She was given a private residence far from London, away from the center of royal life. Her title remained technically, but she would have no official role in royal duties. No public appearances. No involvement in family matters. She had become invisible. Exactly what she had made so many others feel throughout her time as queen consort. Charles remained in the hospital for 2 more weeks. His physical recovery was progressing well, but the emotional healing took longer. He spent hours talking with William and Catherine, rebuilding his understanding of what family meant. Chased the wrong thing for so long, Charles told them one afternoon. I wanted love so badly that I accepted the appearance of it without demanding the reality. We all make mistakes in love, Catherine said gently. What matters is learning from them. You and William chose well. You chose someone who genuinely cares, not someone who wants to be queen. William squeezed Catherine's hand. They both knew how lucky they were, how easily things could have gone differently. Thomas continued his duties. He's now officially assigned as one of the king's personal protection officers. His actions during the crisis had been recognized. He had been given a commendation for his dedication and integrity. Other staff members who had come forward were also acknowledged. Sarah received a promotion. The housekeepers and secretaries who had provided evidence were thanked. Privately by the king himself, Charles made a point of recognizing that they had saved him. Not just from a heart attack, but from a woman who would have controlled his legacy and damaged everything he had worked for. When Charles finally returned to the palace, everything felt different, lighter. The corridors seemed brighter. The staff smiled more. The oppressive presence that Camilla had created was gone. Charles resumed his duties gradually, working limited hours under doctor's orders. He approached his role differently now, more carefully, more thoughtfully. The heart attack had reminded him that time was precious. He strengthened his relationship with William, preparing him more intentionally for eventual succession. He spent more time with his grandchildren, making memories rather than just appearances. He reconnected with friends he had neglected during his marriage to Camilla. One afternoon, 3 months after the collapse, Charles called Thomas into his private study, the same room where it had all happened. I wanted to thank you properly, Charles said. You could have stayed silent. Could have pretended you didn't see or hear what you did. Most people would have. I couldn't do that, sir. It wouldn't have been right. Exactly. You knew what was right, and you did it despite the risk. That's true courage. Charles handed Thomas an envelope. I've written a letter for your file, commending your service and integrity. If you ever want to advance in your career, this should help. Thank you, Your Majesty. But I was just doing what's right. Yes, I know. But doing what's right is rarer than it should be, especially in places of power. Charles paused. I've learned something these past few months. The people closest to power often have the clearest view of the truth. You saw Camilla for who she was because you weren't dazzled by titles or status. You just saw behavior, actions, truth. Thomas nodded, understanding what the king meant. I'm making changes, Charles continued, to how this palace operates, How staff are treated? How concerns are heard? What happened with Camilla should never have been possible. People tried to warn me years ago, but I didn't listen. I didn't create an environment where staff felt safe speaking truth to power. You're creating that environment now, sir. I'm trying. And people like you are helping me do it. The meeting ended with a handshake that felt like more than protocol. It felt like genuine respect between two people who had been through something profound together. Outside, autumn had turned to winter. The palace gardens were bare but beautiful in their starkness. Thomas walked the grounds during his break. Thinking about everything that had happened, he had been a palace guard for years, invisible and silent. Then one morning, he had made a choice to speak up, to act, to risk everything for what was right. That choice had changed the course of the royal family, had protected a king, had exposed truth, had sparked reform. One person's courage had mattered. Inside the palace, Catherine found Charles in the library. He was looking at old photographs, a sad smile on his face. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. "I'm looking at pictures from happier times." Before everything became complicated, he showed her a photo of himself as a young man, idealistic, hopeful. "I wish I could talk to him. Tell him to be more careful with his heart, both literally and figuratively." Catherine sat beside him. "You can't change the past. None of us can. But you can honor it by making better choices now. Is that what you do? After everything with Camilla, all the years of tension, you still found a way to be gracious." "Not always. Sometimes I wanted to scream, to fight back, to make her pay for every cruel word and dismissive glance." Catherine's voice was honest. "But I realized that holding on to anger was only hurting me. She wasn't worth my peace of mind." Charles studied her. "William is lucky to have you. This family is lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have all of you. Even when things are messy and complicated and painful, family is worth fighting for." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching snow begin to fall outside the tall windows. The palace felt peaceful, healing. Across London, in her isolated residence, Camilla sat alone. No staff beyond basic security. No visitors except her lawyer. No invitations to events. No role to play. She had spent years climbing to power, only to discover it meant nothing without genuine relationships. Without love, without people who cared about her rather than what she could do for them. The isolation was suffocating. But it was also clarifying. In the silence, with no one to perform for, Camilla finally had to face who she really was. What she had become, what she had destroyed in her pursuit of position, whether she would learn from it remained to be seen. But for now, she was simply alone with her choices. At Buckingham Palace, life continued. Charles grew stronger every day. William and Catherine prepared for their future roles with new seriousness and dedication. The children grew. The staff worked with renewed purpose, and Thomas Reynolds stood at his post, watching over the family he had sworn to protect. He had learned that protection meant more than physical safety. It meant speaking truth, standing up for what's right, being willing to risk everything when it mattered most. The palace cameras had caught the moment Charles collapsed. But what they couldn't capture was more important. The loyalty of staff who cared, the courage of a guard who spoke up, the strength of a king who finally saw truth, the grace of a future queen who chose forgiveness, the love of a family that survived its greatest test. Sometimes, the most important moments aren't the dramatic collapses or the public scandals. They're the quiet choices made by ordinary people who decide that integrity matters more than safety. Thomas had made that choice, and it had changed everything. As he stood watch that winter evening, snow falling softly outside, he felt at peace. He had done what was right, protected those who needed protecting, spoken truth when silence would have been easier. He was just a guard. But he had proven that even one person, even someone seemingly powerless, could make a difference when they chose courage over comfort. And in a palace full of power and privilege, that lesson was worth more than any crown. The end.